Exodus 7. The Lord said, I am going to make you like God to the king, and your brother Aaron will speak to him as your prophet. Tell Aaron everything I command you, and he will tell the king to let the Israelites leave his country. But I will make the king stubborn, and he will not listen to you, no matter how many terrifying things I do in Egypt. Then I will bring severe punishment on Egypt and lead the tribes of my people out of the land. The Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I raise my hand against them and bring the Israelites out of their country. Moses and Aaron did what the Lord commanded. Moses was 80 years old and Aaron 83 when they spoke to the king. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, when the king asks you to perform a miracle, tell Aaron to throw his walking stick down in front of him, and it will turn into a snake. So Moses and Aaron went to the king and did as the Lord had commanded. Aaron threw the stick down in front of the king and his officers, and it turned into a snake. Then the king called for his wise men and magicians, and by their magic they did the same thing. They threw down their walking sticks, and the sticks turned into snakes. But Aaron's stick swallowed theirs. The king, however, remained stubborn and, just as the Lord had said, the king would not listen to Moses and Aaron. Exodus 8. Then the Lord said to Moses, Go to the king and tell him that the Lord says, Let my people go, so that they can worship me. If you refuse, I will punish your country by covering it with frogs. The Nile will be so full of frogs that they will leave it and go into your palace, your bedroom, your bed, the houses of your officials and your people, and even into your ovens and your baking pans. They will jump up on you, your people, and all your officials. The Lord said to Moses, Tell Aaron to hold his stick out over the rivers, the canals, and the pools, and make frogs come up and cover the land of Egypt. So Aaron held it out over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land. But the magicians did the same thing by their magic and caused frogs to come up on the land of Egypt. The king called for Moses and Aaron and said, Pray to the Lord to take away these frogs, and I will let your people go, so that they can offer sacrifices to the Lord. Moses replied, I will be glad to pray for you. Just set the time when I am to pray for you, your officers, and your people. Then you will be rid of the frogs, and there will be none left except in the Nile. The king answered, Pray for me tomorrow. Moses said, I will do as you ask, and then you will know that there is no other God like the Lord, our God. You, your officials, and your people will be rid of the frogs, and there will be none left except in the Nile. After Moses and Aaron left the king, Moses prayed to the Lord for help with the frogs which he had brought on the king. The Lord did what Moses asked. The frogs died in the houses, the courtyards, and the fields. They were piled up in great heaps, and the land began to smell terrible. But when the king saw that he had been beaten, he became stubborn again and, just as the Lord had said, the king would not listen to Moses and Aaron. Thanks for tuning in. Be blessed as you continue watching. Exodus 8 verses 16 to 32. Then the Lord said to Moses, Tell Aaron to raise his stick and stretch his hand over the rivers, the canals, and the pools, and make frogs come up and cover the land of Egypt. So Aaron raised his hand over the waters, and frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. But the magicians used their magic to do the same thing, and they also made frogs come up and cover the land. Then the magicians said to the king, This is the power of God. But the king remained stubborn and, just as the Lord had said, he would not listen to Moses and Aaron. The Lord commanded Moses, Tell Aaron to strike the ground with his stick, and all the dust will turn into gnats. So Moses did, and gnats covered the ground and flew through the air. The gnats were all over the people and the animals, and the magicians tried to use their magic to make gnats appear, but they could not. The gnats remained on the people and the animals, and the magicians said to the king, This is the power of God. But the king remained stubborn and, just as the Lord had said, he would not listen to Moses and Aaron. The Lord commanded Moses, Raise your arm and strike the ground, and all the land of Egypt will be covered with flies. So Moses did, and swarms of flies flew into the palace of the king and into the houses of his officials. The whole land of Egypt was ruined by the flies. Then the king sent for Moses and Aaron and said, "Go and offer sacrifices to your God here in this country." Moses replied, "It would not be right to do that, because the Egyptians would be offended by our sacrificing the animals that we offer to the Lord our God. If we use these animals and offend the Egyptians by sacrificing them where they can see us, they will stone us to death. We must travel 3 days into the desert to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God, just as he commanded us." The king said, "I will let you go to the desert to offer sacrifices to your God, but you must not go very far. Now pray for me." Moses answered, "As soon as I leave, I will pray to the Lord that tomorrow the flies will leave you, your officials, and your people. But you must not deceive us again and prevent the people from going to offer sacrifices to the Lord." So Moses left the king and prayed to the Lord. And the Lord did as Moses asked. He removed the flies from the king, his officials, and his people. Not one fly remained. But once again the king became stubborn and did not let the people go. As Christians, there are several lessons we can learn from the above passages in Exodus 7 and 8. 1. God's power surpasses human abilities. In both instances, Moses and Aaron performed miracles through God's power, demonstrating that God's power is greater than any human or earthly power. This reminds us of the supremacy and sovereignty of God. 2. Persistence in delivering God's message. Despite the king's stubbornness and refusal to listen, Moses and Aaron faithfully delivered God's message. As Christians, we are called to persist in sharing God's truth and proclaiming His word, even when faced with opposition or resistance. 3. The futility of relying on human wisdom or false powers. The magicians in Egypt were able to replicate some of the miracles through their own magic, but they eventually reached a point where they could not replicate God's miracles. This teaches us the limitations of human wisdom and the emptiness of false powers in comparison to the true power of God. 4. The consequences of stubbornness and disobedience. The Pharaoh's stubbornness and refusal to listen to God's commands brought severe consequences upon the land of Egypt. This serves as a reminder that disobedience and stubbornness have consequences, both individually and collectively. As Christians, we are called to humble ourselves before God and obey His commands. 5. The importance of prayer and reliance on God. Moses consistently turned to God in prayer, seeking His guidance and intervention. Likewise, as Christians, we are called to have a deep dependence on God, seeking His guidance, provision, and deliverance through prayer. 6. God's faithfulness in fulfilling His promises. Despite the Pharaoh's resistance, God remained faithful to His promises. He fulfilled the plagues and eventually brought about the liberation of the Israelites from Egypt. This assures us of God's faithfulness and encourages us to trust in His promises, even in the face of challenges or opposition. Overall, these passages remind us of the power, faithfulness, and sovereignty of God, the importance of obedience and persistence in delivering His message, and the need to rely on Him through prayer and trust in His promises.